This is the Lesbian Historic Motif Podcast, brought to you by Heather Rose Jones. The show looks at lesbian and sapphic themes in history and literature, and historical fiction with queer female characters, including fantastic versions of the past. We present research, interviews, news of the field, book listings, and original historical fiction for your enjoyment. For even more historic research, check out our blog. Welcome to On the Shelf for June 2025. I'd say something about Pride Month, but here at the Lesbian Historic Motif Project, every month is Pride Month. Even so, I've committed to blogging a publication every day this month, just because. I'm still in the middle of a thematic series on research relevant to U.S. lesbian history. After my somewhat distracted time in April, when, if you'll remember, I was frantically preparing for retirement, May saw me covering 3 books and 1 article on that theme. Michael Bronski's A Queer History of the United States was mildly interesting, although it was primarily interested in situating queer history within larger social movements. Wendy Rouse's Public Faces, Secret Lives, A Queer History of the Women's Suffrage Movement was absolutely amazing, and I'm recommending it as essential background reading for anyone interested in lesbian history in the late 19th and early 20th century. Peter Boag's Redressing America's Frontier Past looks at cross-dressing, broadly defined, in the Wild West, and how those individuals were erased or explained away in the popular understanding of American history. I also blogged a journal article by Boag discussing how that book came to be written and some of the logistical difficulties of the research. Stuck in the middle of this thematic series was Judith C. Brown's Immodest Acts, The Life of a Lesbian Nun in Renaissance Italy, as background for a podcast last month. I don't know if I'll have enough American material to continue the theme all month, but it's a good excuse to get caught up with that set of topics. As one of my retirement projects, I plan to put up more bonus content for Patreon subscribers. This will largely be content only available to paying patrons, because I want to see if I can grow the support for the project in a meaningful way. Currently, I've put up the outline for the book project, and I'm brainstorming for other material patrons might be interested in. I've also restarted my author newsletter, which will have interesting news and maybe even some special offers related to my own fiction writing. You can sign up through a link on my website, which you can find in the show notes, assuming you didn't find the podcast directly through the website in the first place. I'm still settling into my expanded activities now that I don't have a day job, or at least now that I don't have another day job besides writing and the project. So, expect things to pick up gradually. In May, of course, I went off to the annual Medieval Congress in Michigan, which used to be a good opportunity for book shopping, but we seem to be in a several-year lull in queer history publications, at least in terms of what the publishers have on display at the Congress. I did pick up the latest volume of Medieval Clothing and Textiles, plus a book on Tudor and Stuart cookery, but nothing for the project. Fortunately, there's no lull in the release of new lesbian and sapphic historical fiction. This month, I saw another dozen or so books in Cookie Cutter series that I suspect are AI generated and have chosen not to promote. Plus, one book that not only smells of AI generation, but where other books by the same author are nonfiction about using AI for writing. I mention this so that listeners are aware of what's going on out there in the publishing world. Be aware of what you're consuming and how those choices are supporting or undermining the field. Having gotten that out of the way, I want to mention a February book that almost slipped past me. When I interviewed Margaret Vandenberg about her recent release, Craze, she mentioned that Claes Press would be re-releasing her previous book, An American in Paris. This part of the story gives the background to the main character in Craze. In the States, celibacy had never been my strong suit. In Paris, it was a crime against nature, a mortal sin. With this cheeky response to her new city, Henry Adams, recently released from the tyranny of prohibition and freshly appointed as an art correspondent for En Vogue magazine, sets out to discover the literary, artistic, and more unmentionable pleasures of Paris during the Roaring Twenties. Welcomed with open arms by Gertrude Stein, and somewhat more soberly by Alice B. Toklas, Henry hobnobs with expatriate luminaries, Natalie Barney, Picasso, Colette, Romaine Brooks, Ernest Hemingway, Juna Barnes, and unleashes her Yankee curiosity, only to find herself entangled in an avant-garde art theft ring and the shackles of Paris's sapphic underground. Several April books only just came to my attention. First up is Whispers of Love Beneath the Hidden Manor by Ayo Sa. A forbidden bond, a deadly secret, a journey toward freedom. In the grand shadowed halls of a noble house, Pinfa arrives as the fourth wife on the very day the first wife mysteriously dies. Behind the perfumed tea and silk-draped corridors, whispers of betrayal and poison weave an invisible web. Amid suspicion and hidden grief, Pinfa meets Lalin, an elegant wife with a smile like soft rain and eyes that conceal unspoken storms. As their hearts begin to entwine, Pinfa finds herself torn between uncovering a killer and surrendering to a love she was never meant to have. When trust shatters and death creeps closer with each passing day, Pinfa must choose, expose the truth and destroy everything, or grasp the fragile, forbidden happiness that blooms even in the darkest soil. Set against the haunting beauty of old Siam, Whispers of Love and Poison is a slow-burn, girl-love historical thriller of yearning, secrets, and a love fierce enough to defy fate itself. Caitlin Crowe offers us a high society romance in The Ladies. Lady Emily, a wealthy young woman in Victorian England, is expected to marry advantageously to secure her family's fortune. She unexpectedly finds herself attracted to Lady Victoria, a bold and unconventional woman who defies societal expectations. Their secret courtship begins with stolen moments in secluded gardens and hidden corners of London, their love blossoming despite the rigid social norms of the time. However, their relationship faces significant challenges as gossip spreads amongst London's high society, threatening their reputations and the standing of their families. Lady Emily is pressured to marry a suitable man, while Lady Victoria grapples with her own desires and the fear of public condemnation. Just as I sometimes have to make my best guess on sapphic content, I sometimes have to make guesses to track other types of representation. The Eye of the Water, Between Creek and Roots by Stephanie Hager-Lyons appears to feature black characters based on the cover illustration. When Jo McBrayer steps into the creek behind her family's Louisiana farmhouse, she doesn't expect to step back in time. But that's exactly what happens, just long enough to see a house that shouldn't be standing, fields full of workers long gone, and a woman with eyes full of recognition. Her sister Liz, a practical academic, dismisses it as one of Jo's wild tales, until Jo brings back a journal, leather-bound, dated 1906, written by a woman named Marcella McBrayer, who, according to family records, never existed. As Jo slips deeper into the past, drawn back again and again by the mysterious pull of the land, Liz begins to uncover long-buried secrets of love and erasure, a bloodline severed and rewritten. At the center of it all is a child named Clara, hidden from history, and a symbol carved into oak, stone, and memory, an eye surrounded by crescent moons. There's one new May book that I found, A Soft Place to Land by Kelsey Krantz. After an unexpectedly intimate encounter in the fall of 1950, best friends Virginia and Elaine part ways to each follow their dreams, Elaine to medical school and Virginia to find a husband. When Elaine returns and Virginia turns up in the middle of the night, the two realize their mutual youthful crush has evolved into much deeper romantic feelings. But in an era when widespread fears of communism produce immense pressure to adhere to rigid social norms, there is no path for two women to fall in love. Together, they must learn how to protect the relationship and each other from the consequences of choosing love. As usual, the new releases for the current month of June are dominated by books from mainstream presses, which tend to have better advanced publicity than indies. This month, they're also a bit heavy on the historic fantasy, starting with Ladies' Night by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner from HarperCollins. Gwen is sick of hiding the fact that she's taken over her father's blacksmithing duties, hiding her attraction to girls, hiding her yearning for glory as a knight. Meanwhile, Lady Isabel of Avington, Queen Bee of the castle, has never once considered hiding who she is. Until now. She's been chosen as the grand prize in the Tournament of Dragon Slayers, to be given to whichever knight can claim her hand. And for the first time in her life, she can't talk her way out of trouble. When Isabel discovers Gwen's knightly ambitions, they hatch a scheme together. Gwen will joust in the tournament, disguised as Sir Gawain. Winning means freedom for Isabel and glory for Gwen. Losing means, well, let's not go there. One thing's for sure, falling in love was never the plan. But the best laid plans are often trampled all over by dragons. I've heard very interesting things about 6 Wild Crowns by Holly Race from Little Brown, which is set in an alternate Tudor England. The king has been appointed by God to marry 6 queens. Those 6 queens are all that stand between the kingdom of Elban and ruin. Or so we have been told. Each queen vies for attention. Clever, ambitious Boleyn is determined to be Henry's favourite, and if she must incite a war to win Henry over, so be it. Seymour acts as spy and assassin in a court teeming with dragons, backstabbing courtiers, and strange magic. But when she and Boleyn become the unlikeliest of things, allies, the balance of power begins to shift. Together they will discover an ancient rotting magic at Elban's heart, a magic that their king will do anything to protect. I'm not sure whether Daughter of Doom by Jean-Claude Van Rickenhem from Levine Querido has overt fantasy elements or simply includes period-appropriate belief in gods and fate. Denmark, 870 AD. Yrsa knows her place in the village of Memmerstool. Though she was born with a crooked foot, she's never let anyone underestimate her. After all, she's the daughter of Toki, the helmsman, and granddaughter of the fearsome warrior Gudrun the Torch, who, according to legend, stood before the walls of Paris, splattered in the blood of Frankish warriors. And no one else in the village shares her ability to see what the Norns, the 3 weavers who live under the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, and craft people's fates, have in store for them. One day, the men return from a raid with a high-ranking hostage, Sister Job, and though the 2 girls couldn't be more different, they look out for one another. And when one of the villagers viciously assaults Sister Job, and she and Yrsa mortally wound him in self-defense, they're forced to take to the sea to escape the wrath of the warriors of Mimmerstool, and worse, the wrath of the gods. Can either of them escape their fate? Do they even want to? The next book up is by this month's featured author. A Rare Find by Joanna Lowell from Berkeley Publishing Group is a charming Regency romance involving amateur archaeology and a non-binary love interest. Elfreda Marston has finally made a major discovery, an ancient amulet proving the Viking army camped on her family's estate. Too bad her nemesis is back from London, freshly exiled after a scandal and ready to wreak havoc on her life. Georgie Redmayne is everything Elfreda isn't. Charming, popular, carefree, distractingly attractive, and bored to death by the countryside. When the 2 collide, literally, the amulet is lost, and with it Elfreda's big chance to lead a proper excavation. Now Elfreda needs new evidence of medieval activity, and Georgie needs money to escape the doldrums of Derbyshire. Joining forces to locate a hidden hoard of Viking gold is the best chance for them both. Marstons and Redmaynes don't get along, and that's the least of the reasons these enemies can't dream of something more. But as the quest takes them on unexpected adventures, sparks of attraction ignite a feeling increasingly difficult to identify as hatred. It's far too risky to explore, and far too tempting to resist. Elfreda and Georgie soon find that the real treasure comes with a steep price, and the promise of a happiness beyond all measure. Rachel Ford's Meredith and Alex Thatch mystery series has a 3rd installment, Murder by Proxy. The cover copy focuses on the mystery and takes for granted that you know that Alex Thatch is in gender disguise for the sake of her marriage. Murder is one thing, but quiet Fenwood-on-Sea is simply not prepared for Aunt Anne and her love affairs. After an unexpected revelation from her latest paramour, Aunt Anne's happy world is thrown into disarray. In despair, she seeks refuge in Fenwood-on-Sea with Alec and Mary. Unfortunately, murder follows her, or so it seems. Someone is killing, seemingly without rhyme or reason, and the only link between the victims is their connection to Anne herself. As the bodies start to stack up, Alec and Mary race to find the killer, before he or she gets to them. I had to wait for some early reviews to confirm the sapphic content in Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab from Tor.com. The early reviews were also my first clue that it has vampire content. As a general tendency, vampire novels don't tend to fit into my parameters for historical fiction, unless the historic setting is a strong part of the plot, as in this case. This is a story about hunger. 1532, Santo Domingo de la Calzada. A young girl grows up wild and wily. Her beauty is only outmatched by her dreams of escape. But Maria knows she can only ever be a prize or a pawn in the games played by men. When an alluring stranger offers an alternate path, Maria makes a desperate choice. She vows to have no regrets. This is a story about love. 1827, London. A young woman lives in idyllic but cloistered life on her family's estate until a moment of forbidden intimacy sees her shipped off to London. Charlotte's tender heart and seemingly impossible wishes are swept away by an invitation from a beautiful widow, but the price of freedom is higher than she could have imagined. This is a story about rage. 2019, Boston. College was supposed to be her chance to be someone new. That's why Alice moved halfway across the world, leaving her old life behind. But after an out-of-character one-night stand leaves her questioning her past, her present, and her future, Alice throws herself into the hunt for answers and revenge. I'm putting 2 titles in the Other Books of Interest section. The first one, Damsels and Dinosaurs by Ren Jones, gets classified here because it sounds like the sapphic content may be restricted to an ex-girlfriend. But hey, at least there are dinosaurs. The Fletcher family honey business teeters on the brink of bankruptcy as shipments from their eccentric matriarch's farm grow scarce. But Poppy refuses to let her family become destitute, and she will do anything to get to the bottom of the mystery. However, on her aunt's strange island, Poppy finds more questions than answers. The bees defy expectations. The farm is full of ancient creatures, and her aunt's secrets run deeper than she originally suspected. Meanwhile, her imminent arranged marriage to the heir of a prominent tea company, Giuseppe, jeopardizes her investigation. Their meddling families are relentless in making the marriage a swift reality, even if that means sending Giuseppe and Poppy's grumpy ex, Athena, to retrieve her. Athena knows the reunion will be awkward, and getting the stubborn Poppy to do anything will be difficult, but she can't resist the promise of the island. If she can win over Poppy's mysterious aunt, she might finally get the opportunity to pursue her dreams. Giuseppe just wants to draw, drink tea, and avoid all the drama. But he supposes he must go along too. It is his future wife after all. On an island where the scandals are bigger than the dinosaurs, a group of Regency aristocrats search for their second chances and rewrite history as we know it. The second title is placed in this section because, although it's clearly sapphic, it isn't clear how much of the content would count as historic. But I figure my listeners might have an interest in sword lesbians in general, which are the main theme in By Her Sword, a sapphic fantasy romance anthology edited by Aaron Branch from Sunset Wave Press. A fiery mage tracks down the swordswoman who escaped with more than just a magical relic. Across the stars, ex-lovers get a second chance on a dragon-infested planet. In a different galaxy, a confident gladiator must melt the frozen heart of an ice princess. During the distant period of feudal Japan, a traveler with a djinn inside her faces the challenge of her life. This fantasy collection features 12 swashbuckling adventures spanning a variety of settings from the distant magical past to the speculative galactic future. And what am I reading? Despite all my new free time, I haven't managed to finish a single novel in the last month, though that was largely due to getting sucked in by Ada Palmer's history book, Inventing the Renaissance. Palmer is also a science fiction author, but this book comes from her primary career as a historian. It's a delightfully readable, if very long, explanation of why everything you thought you knew about the Italian Renaissance is probably wrong, but that the reality was far more fascinating. As mentioned previously, we have an interview this month with Joanna Lowell. Joanna Lowell is here to talk to us about her Regency era romance coming out this month, A Rare Find. Welcome, Joanna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about the book?
Well, it's my first Regency romance, which is exciting for me because my Victorian books were all set in the 1880s. So this takes us back to 1818, and it's a rural romp featuring sort of star-crossed enemies to frenemies to friends to lovers, pair of neighbors, Elfreda Marsden, who's an aspiring archaeologist, and Georgie Redmayne, who is a rakish actor, not exactly a ne'er-do-well, but someone with a lust for life who likes to be in the world, the social world of London, and is now sent back to Derbyshire to cool their heels after some misadventures. And the two of them are thrown together and start to collaborate against their better judgment and their will on a treasure hunt as they are out to find some Viking gold. So there are all sorts of rural shenanigans along the way as it explores history and yeah, there's conversations about yeah, gender and sexuality as yeah, as their feelings develop across the book.
Yes, I was initially unsure if you'd be interested in appearing on this podcast because the pairings in the two books of yours that I am interested in, A Rare Find and A Sure Thing, they don't fit comfortably into the category of lesbian quote unquote relationships. So in A Rare Find, Georgie is non-binary, and in A Sure Thing, Kit is decidedly transmasculine.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when we're working with historic identities in historical fiction, and especially with understandings of sexuality, there aren't clear dividing lines for saying this relationship is sapphic and this one isn't. And a lot of books that 10, 15 years ago might have been marketed as lesbian. Now we're saying, well, no, wait, this character is more on the trans spectrum. So would you be willing to talk about how your books are situated and how you deal with writing characters in that fuzzy territory between modern identity categories and historic concepts? And then maybe also talk a little bit about how they're marketed.
Yeah, man, that's such a it's such a like
I know
toothsome.
that's a lot.
It's like it's so great. Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things we have these, desires to categorize, and also taxonomy has been imposed on peoples, across time. But like and it can be harmful, it can be useful. There are all sorts of gradations, but every sort of individual is inhabiting their sexuality and their gender in their particular way, and that's one of the reasons why I just want more queer books and trans books and gender variant books and books proposing all sorts of models for gender and sexuality to be out there in the world, because one of the dangers of there being too few, I think, is uh people fixing on this is what it means to be a lesbian, this is what it means to be trans, this is what it means to be non-binary, when there are as many iterations, variations as there are people, even though we might be, we can have certain behavior categories or types, these sort of things get codified and challenged in various ways. And so even within the books, I try to show people in different types of relationships who are experiencing their gender in different sorts of ways. So, for example, in A Rare Find, Georgie wears dresses. Sometimes they wear breeches. They use they them pronouns with their friends, which is anachronistic, but not impossible. And it's something that I actually have a conversation about in the book, like how they came to use they with their friends. But there are other characters, some of Georgie's friends, who both seem to feel perfectly confident and happy in their femme identities, who are in a committed relationship with each other. Elf hasn't thought as much about her gender or sexuality, and the book could, there's she has a queer awakening, and um, I don't know how she's really only been in love with Georgie, and Georgie doesn't identify as a man or a woman. And so I don't know, there's all sorts of different gender expressions in the books. And I guess they don't sit like neatly in lesbian romance. But I guess I would hope that people interested in lesbian romance and interested in queer romance would want to, yeah, would want to check out books that are adjacent and in interesting ways. And I guess I don't see, I would, I'm happy to be on a podcast about lesbian historic motifs because also both Georgie and Kit from A Sure Thing, who is very decidedly transmasculine, he uses um, he pronouns. They were both socialized as girls and young women, and neither of them disavow that. And it is a part of how they move through the world. And in A Sure Thing, Kit, for example, though he doesn't identify as a Sapphist, he still has deep connections with Sapphic friends and reconnects with them. And so, I think a lot of trans masculine people, I mean, not all, but did move at one point in lesbian circles or genderqueer, various queer worlds and might still participate in those spaces. So I do think it's really blurry. I guess is the I do think it's really blurry, and I think that could be a really nice, generative, inclusive thing.
Thank you. That was exactly the discussion I was hoping for. Um, so the previous book of yours that I've read is A Sure Thing. But when I was looking at your backlist, I noticed that the botanist character from A Sure Thing is a secondary character in one of your previous books, The Runaway Duchess, and that several of your books from that era are set in the art world. I wonder if they're all woven together in some way. Are there connections in all of those?
Yeah, there are. They all pick up characters, except a rare find because it's set earlier. It's completely different cast of characters, and it's nothing to do with the art world or really even London. And so I just wanted to do something different. But the other books, The Duke Undone, The Runaway Duchess, Artfully Yours, and A Sure Thing, all pick up different characters. So Kit from A Sure Thing is in A Duke Undone, and at that point is a part of a sisterhood of artists that are promoting women painters. And so part of his journey is figuring out a way to still promote, women's rights and women artists, even though he doesn't identify as a woman anymore, to kind of figure out a way to square his masculinity and moving through the world as a man with his like deeply held feminist principles. And so if you've read all of the books, you kind of see that trajectory, which is fun, I think, and a lot of romances that romance series kind of pick up
Yeah.
characters from other books, which I think adds to the reading experience. So you could read each as a standalone. It just is,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm always looking out for that sort of thing because it's a fun sort of detective story secondary aspect to reading them. It's like, wait, I remember this character.
Yeah.
Charles does a lot of that too, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons why I was like, yes, absolutely, I want to be on this podcast is because it's just a treasure trove of historical information and just also incredible insights into the way various motifs structure queer historical fiction. And one of the things that I would love to ask you about, because Georgie, in A Rare Find, is in the world of the theater in London, and the theater has long been a space of gender play. And I know that you did an episode at one point on Charlotte Shark, who is actually a model for me in thinking about Georgie's gender identity, because we don't really know today how Charlotte Shark would identify if she had the ability to identify in any sort of which way, but she lived as a woman. She sometimes lived as a man. She wore breeches on the stage. She was married as Mr. Brown to a woman. It may or may not have been sexual. So anyway, I read her autobiography, and so anyway, I'm just kind of curious in terms of your research, what you have gleaned about like the long history of lesbian and possible trans and non-binary folks in the theater in England.
Well, that is fascinating. I did in fact do a two-part podcast on uh, lesbian sapphic themes in the theater, both as on stage and in the context of the actors. And of course that was focused a little bit more on earlier centuries. You get into the Victorian era and the cross-gender performers, so impersonation performers, and who can tell what is an act and what is, oh my God, this is a space where I get to express my inner self. And I think that there's a lot of scope for using theatricals, both professional theatricals and amateur theatricals, as a way for people to explore identities and roles. I'm talking about in fiction. So when you're writing historical fiction, you have a character and you want that character to have an aha moment. And it's like, well, put them in a cross-gender role on stage and have them kiss a girl, I think it's a very rich context. And one of the things that that really hit me when I was researching the theater episodes was how weird and straight-laced and backward English theater was. That you get this impression, oh well, women were not allowed to be on stage until the Restoration era. Well, that's just England. Women were on stage in Italy centuries earlier than that. So one of the things that I think, especially in historical fiction, where we consume tropes, we consume stereotypes, we consume, this is the way things are in this genre. And it's easy to lose track that that's not history necessarily.
Yeah.
And that applies to so many topics where, the one big bugbear I have is, do not make your pre-Freudian characters have Freudian anxieties.
That's tough to do as a writer, as a neurotic writer. But I absolutely, yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's also so many things that you maybe are researching and are putting into it is, your historical fiction or historical romance that strike readers as inaccurate aren't necessarily inaccurate. It's just that it's going against a particular stereotype or trope as represented or overrepresented in a particular genre of literature. It's so that's like an interesting thing when you're getting, again, this happens with queer books just because sometimes people think that there weren't queer people living queer lives in history.
Alternately, they think that queer people in history were exactly like us.
Right.
They thought
Right.
like us, they experienced like us, they imagined things like us. And that's something where, in the research, because the blog and podcast are aimed at, here is information for authors. Here is information for you to use when you're writing historic fiction. It's a very peculiar and specialized angle. And so looking at things like, gender identity, and you running up against the issue of socialization. If you are socialized to believe that thinking and feeling and acting this way is male and thinking and feeling and acting this way is female, it becomes very difficult to say, do I have an internal gender identity, or am I being convinced by society that the things I'm feeling must be categorized in a certain way? And so, especially around the topic of gender identity, I try to be very careful in what I'm putting out on the blog and podcast and saying, this is information. This is not prescription. I am not talking about people's identities. I'm talking about how they lived in society. And that's why, writing books like the ones you're writing, it can be really difficult to do something where it is both identifiable for a modern person and also true to its era. And we can swing too far in all directions on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a negotiation, and I do think that there's anachronism is necessarily involved in that process. I mean, it's inevitable, and I know it can be strategically deployed too. I mean, I really love Alexis Hall's novels, and I just read his trilogy, Something Fabulous, Something Spectacular, Something Extraordinary. They play very, very fast and loose with the history, the period. They're set in the Regency, and they're so fun and they're so ebulliently queer, and I love them. But that's way over on another, like one side of the spectrum. And I don't know, I think of somebody like Sarah Waters, whose books I've also really enjoyed and were kind of like formational for me. Tipping the Velvet, when I, was in college, I was like, oh, this book, it feels like it's more, I mean, to me, like kind of engaging the actual like history, and that's just like a different approach. I mean, for me, I am trying to find a way to move between having something that's going to be, I don't know, legible and enjoyable to somebody reading right now that isn't just disregarding the the historicity of where things are said and how people would have maybe thought about themselves. But we don't know that, because so much of what we get about people living in the archives, it's, sometimes you get a diary, but it's often police records, newspaper articles. Um,
Yeah,
so
we
you're
learn about the fringe cases.
Mhm.
So like when I did the episode on, legal aspects, it's like we know the legal consequences for the set of people who had legal consequences.
Right.
But if you take that as your metric for what was it like to be queer, it's like it's really dreary. But then you look and say, it's like, well, wait a minute, we've got, was it 5 women in all of the medieval era who we know for certain, were executed for something adjacent to having same-sex relationships. And then when you dig into them, it's like, well, it wasn't actually the same-sex relationship aspect that they got in trouble for. And 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 you keep backing out and saying, well, wait a minute, it wasn't the fact lesbianism was not illegal, but a lot of lesbian adjacent things were illegal. And people only cared about it if you did these certain things. And it gets very complicated. I'm not quite sure where I was going with that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and then is like, obviously tied to class and race and
Yeah.
colonial position and sort of so many other intersecting factors. And I think as modern readers and writers, it's really hard to get away from the idea of just like identity categories, which didn't exist in that period of time, because we're just so, we think about a gay person, a transgender like you know, it's a, it's a type of person, as opposed to a set of behaviors, a shifting plane of desire. Just the fact that sexologists were coming up with these categories in the late 19th centuries, and that, homosexual and then heterosexual as categories, they didn't exist in the Regency. Those weren't terms that people could have used to kind of categorize themselves. So I don't know that, what do you do with those kinds of leaps? And
Right.
yeah, I mean, that's why I think people writing fiction have a lot to learn from the archives and from places like, your blog and your podcast. And it's also cool, I think, that writers can fill in the gaps, maybe with flights of fancy, but I do think it like creates, I don't know, opportunities to imagine into those spaces. And that's exciting too.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that fiction writers can do is to cherry pick. Here are the actual historic facts that I can construct a happy story out of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. Absolutely.
So, in addition to a rare find, which is just coming out, do you have any other upcoming projects you'd like to tell people about?
I don't have anything scheduled or that's like set to come out. I have a couple of things that I'm working on. I'm not sure where they're going to go. A friend and I are um, right now working on a adaptation of a retelling of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. I don't know what's going to come of that, but that's been pretty fun. But historical romance is not having a great moment in terms of publishing. Publishers really aren't acquiring that much of it right now. Traditional publishers still want to write it, but I'm between contracts and I'm trying to figure out what's next. I have a couple of novellas set in the Regency, and I might write a few more of those just for fun. But it's a maybe a fallow period right now for this past year.
Hmm. So is there anything that you have read recently that you'd love to give a shout out to?
Oh, well, um, A Gentleman's Gentleman by T.J. Alexander just came out. It's a Regency romance with a trans masculine lead, and it's great and really fun. So I just read that and really enjoyed it. And I'm really excited about Ladies in Hating. That's another yeah, have you is that on your radar
On my
already?
radar. I think I may even have pre-ordered a copy.
Yeah, by Alexandra Vasti, and she's wonderful. Her books are great, so I'm so excited for her sapphic romance. So that one I'm really excited about. Probably a zillion more, but those are the two that spring to mind.
Uh-huh. So if people wanted to find you online, assuming you want to be found, where should they look?
Oh, I do want to be found. Yes, I have a website, which is joannalowell.com. And I am also on Instagram, which I'm very bad at, but I do respond to direct messages when I realize I've gotten them. So yeah, you can find me in those places.
I will put links to that in the show notes. So thank you so much for sharing your time with the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast. See the show notes for links to people and topics. Most shows will have a transcript linked as well. If you have a book announcement, a topic suggestion, or might like to appear on the show, please drop me an email. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and consider supporting our Patreon.